Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we are on top of Daf Yutet Amud Bet. This month's learning of the community should be dedicated for Refuah Shlema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid and Daniel Moshe Ben Farangis. Months of learning has been dedicated by Shei family. Should be an ultimate zchut for their mishpacha. Bezat Hashem. Amen. So we started a discussion of whether or not Megillat Ta'anit, which was a list of dates that you would not fast, you would not do hesped, still is intact in the post-fact of Beit HaMikdash after the Churban, or maybe it's not. We went back and forth, and the Gemara at the end proved that seemingly Megillat Ta'anit still should be intact because we find dates on the calendar that still are, even after the Churban, they were instituted to be dates of happiness that you don't fast, and therefore, obviously, Megillat Ta'anit should be intact, because had it been nullified after the Churban, we certainly would not be busy creating new dates on that list. If the list by itself is out the window, obviously I'm not going to be busy creating new additions to the list. Which list? So if we see that the Chazal were concerned to put on the calendar new dates for things that happened post the Churban, obviously that would indicate that Megillat Ta'anit is still intact. So the last thing that we discussed was a Shita of Rabbi Meir. This was a date on Kafchet Adar. That's the date that the Romans, this is post the Churban Beit HaMikdash, because as we mentioned, Rabbi Meir was the student of Rabbi Akiva, was the student of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? So, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as we know, was the Nasi of the actual period of the Churban. So this is certainly after the Churban, and yet the date that was announced that Jews could go back to learning Torah, as we saw yesterday, was set to be a date of happiness in Megillat Ta'anit, so to speak. So therefore, you see definitely that after the Churban, still this was celebrated. So this was a big proof for the Manda Amar that holds that Megillat Ta'anit was not batel, and a Kashya on Rav and Rav Chanina who hold Megillat Ta'anit was nullified. That's how we left it. Now the Gemara on the top of Yutet Amud Bet now says, no problem. It's not that you disproved a checkmate on Rav and Rav Chanina. It is that this is actually Machloket Tanaim. On the very top line, the Gemara says, Tanaehi, this is indeed a Machloket Tanaim, the Tanya, as we learned in a Braita. Hayamim, Ha'elu, Ha'ketuvim, B'Megillat Ta'anit. This is like as clear as you could get. These dates, and again we mentioned there are up to 32 different dates on the calendar. The greatest of them that we know very well would be Purim and Hanukkah, right? And then you have all these other ones that are much less known. Says the Braita, all of these dates, Ben Bizman Shebet HaMikdash Kayam, Ben Bizman She'en Bet HaMikdash Kayam, Asurin, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds, whether you have Bet HaMikdash, whether you don't have Bet HaMikdash, these dates are going to be prohibited from fasting and mourning, because they're considered good dates even after the Churban. So this is very much in line with the Rabbi Meir that we just mentioned a minute ago, who is the source of the date of Kafchet Be'adar, because the Romans let the Jews learn at the end of the day, right? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rabbi Meir, and he holds, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Bezman Shebet HaMikdash Kayam Asurin. When we have the Beit HaMikdash, they're going to be Asur because, the time of Beit HaMikdash, everything is is up and running, and these are considered dates of happiness. They're very much in line with the other 4 dates of the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, we learn that just like the 4 Ta'aniyot fasts that they were instituted to be days of mourning for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and when Beit Sheni was built, they became now days of Simcha, right? Som HaRevi'i, Som HaChamishi, Som HaShvi'i, Som HaAsiri. Those dates of Shvasar B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Asara B'Tevet, and Som Gedaliah, Asara B'Tevet. Those dates, when Beit HaMikdash is up and running, the dates of happiness and Simcha. The moment Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, is no longer, they turn into Yemei Evel. And says Rabbi Yossi, these dates also are not going to be any better than those 4 dates, and therefore, En Beit HaMikdash Kayam, Mutarin, they become now nullified, and it's mutar to fast on those dates, Mipene She'evel Hu Lahem, because now we're in a period of years of Evel. We are mourning on the Beit HaMikdash. Now it could be over 1900 years, and still, because we're mourning the Beit HaMikdash, we also are not happy on those minor dates of things. Now, I want to just open a parenthesis here. This is something that I heard initially. I believe I heard this many years ago as a bacher from Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. I believe that's how he said it. I may have my own addition to that. I think the concept I picked from one of the talks he gave on a Tisha B'Av. You know, the Ashkenazim especially, the Sfardim are very, orderly when it comes to the kinot of Tisha B'Av. It's based on, there's a structure to it. It's based on Eicha mainly, which is the main thing we read both at night and in the day of Tisha B'Av. And then there are certain kinot that are mostly kinot of very hundreds of years ago. You have obviously a little bit of Spanish Inquisition mixed in that, in some customary to say it, some ki'ilot. Ashkenazim have a kina for everything that has happened, and they've had a quite an eventful history in well, it's actually interesting because the years of prosperity in Ashkenaz were very difficult years for Sfaradim, and vice versa. So, and other parentheses, in the parentheses, you'll see the eras of Jewish history based on the Sfarim that are available on those eras. Right, when there's prosperity, financially, Jews are doing well, and they're not persecuted, you will have Torah flourish, Yeshivot flourish, and you have Sfarim. That's one of the biggest barometers of prosperity in the community. When things are quiet, when you let the Jews be, what do? We learn. We want to just let us be, and we'll learn. We'll write Sfarim. That's what would happen, right? Naturally, we're Am HaSefer. We're the people of the book. It's not just the Sefer Torah, but that's what we do, right? So if you take a look, the era of all the Rishonim, Gdolah Rishonim, when things were still good, right? And even in the beginning of when things changed a little bit, up to Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritba, that generation, all the Rishonim, not all, but vast majority of the Rishonim are all Sfaradim, right? Those were not necessarily great times in Ashkenaz, but then afterwards, all the Nosei Kelim, not all, but many of the Nosei Kelim of Shulchan Aruch, they are Ashkenazi, because in those times in the Sephardi world, things were very difficult. So this has always been like this. Ashkenazim, every difficulty that has happened, it has turned into a kina. You have kinot for Holocaust, the most recent ones. You have for Tach V'Tat and all those gezerot. So Rabbi Weinberg Zatzal, he said that we think that Tisha B'Av is a date of mourning, it was the most heavy date of mourning because both of the Batei Mikdash were destroyed. And we also had the Spanish Inquisition, and we had the First World War, and many other smaller things. So once we have all this, it's a heavy weight. So once we are mourning, just put on it everything. Put the World War II and the Tachvatat and the Inquisition and every other davar ra that has happened to Kaiser, just pile it up. We'll set one day to mourn everything. That's how we think. So that's an incorrect understanding. It's much deeper than that. The reason that you have the Tachvatat is because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. The reason that we have the Inquisition is because you don't have the Beit HaMikdash. The reason that you have October 7th is because you have a Beit HaMikdash. The reason that you have all the tzarot happening to Klal Yisrael is because we have forfeited that close relationship that we had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When things were well, people would try, and they wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't be able to. All of the attempts of the Goyim, imagine what happened by Chizkiyahu HaMelech. You had an army of 185,000 trained soldiers, according to some Midrashim, that would be only the generals of the army. That's a tremendous army. The greatest and most sophisticated army of the time by far, that conquered the entire residential region of basically the world back then, referring to Sanheriv, the Bilbelet Kol HaOlam, says the Gemara. And he comes to Yerushalayim, says this. He wouldn't come because he had heard it's impregnable, it's no way. But at some point, when he took the whole thing everywhere else, he said, how hard can it be already? And he comes, he says, like, the old city, like a little tiny thing. He says, this? Piece of cake, right? But what happened? When they laid siege, that night was Leil Pesach, and none of them woke up in the morning. Just miraculously dropped dead, like quite literally. Aside from himself and his head of army and two sons, and he made a neder that if he makes it alive back home, he's going to slaughter his two sons for his avodah zarah, and somehow they heard what he said, and he became the victim of his sons. They killed him before he kills them. On the way, that's the end of Sancheriv, the mighty king. That's when things were good, right? The reason that we have any of the other tzarot is because we don't have that relationship, which manifested itself in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, in the breakage of that edifice of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, namely the Beit HaMikdash, right? So therefore, this sheds a little bit more light into this shita in the Gemara, because otherwise you'll think to yourself, like, what's the connection? Just because the 4 dates that were set for fasting, for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, those 4 dates are back after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, because again, after the first Beit HaMikdash, they were good. We were good, right? Those dates were Yemes Simcha v'Sason, right? But now that the Beit HaMikdash Hasheni was destroyed again, those dates are back to be days of mourning. You would say, oh, so why does that have to do with all the other good, happy days, right? Why should they also turn into days of regular dates and not be dates of celebration? So one understanding could be because once you don't have that relationship, this is celebrating our miraculous relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when that relationship is broken, right, so though keeping the dates is an empty box, those dates are only representation of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When that relationship is no longer there, then those dates will become dates of regular dates, no longer dates of celebration either. Fine. So that's the Gemara. Because, and again, I said it because of these 3 words. Because now it's the period of Evel. Not that those dates are Evel. Those dates are Kafchet Be'adar. Didn't become a bad day. Right? So why would you stop celebrating Kafchet Be'adar? It was an amazing reason on the calendar. Some years ago, miraculously, the Romans allowed us to learn Torah. Fine, it would be an amazing thing to do, right? Just like Hanukkah, many years ago, right? A miracle happened and we were liberated basically from the Yevanim. So we celebrate that. So why would it be that? Because when the relationship is broken, then there's not much to celebrate. It's not that that day becomes a bad day. It's just that we don't celebrate it any longer. Now we have to answer still the Chanukah and Purim, right? We'll get to that in just a second. Says Gemara, what's the halakha? At the end of all these full amud of discussion, back, forth, almost the whole daf of discussion, hilchata batlu. The halakha is, Megillat Ta'anit is batil, was nullified. But don't get too excited. V'hilchata, and the halakha is lo batlu. The halakha is they were nullified. The halakha is also they were not nullified. That's like the greatest contradiction within 4 words in the Gemara. Can you believe that? Hilchata batlu, hilchata lo batlu. So what does that mean, says the Gemara? Kasha hilchata hilchata. That would be a very immediate contradiction, and the Gemara answers to that. Lo kasha. Nope, it's not a contradiction. It depends which one. Kan bechanukah upurim, kan b'sha'ar yomi. The one that's not batil is the 2 dates of Chanukah and Purim. Those 2 are Yamim Tovim Derabanan, the rabbinic holidays of days of joy and Simcha, and those were not nullified. Those we still keep to today. And all the other ones of Megillat Ta'anit were nullified. What's the difference? The difference we already discussed by Chanukah. If you remember, the Gemara itself said it, that Chanukah, because it was mefursam, it became so well accepted and so well known that everyone knows. You don't have to have a calendar Megillat Ta'anit. Everyone just like they know there is Yom Kippurim, they also know that there is Yom Purim, right? Everyone knows that there's Chanukah. People look forward to it. It was so strongly well spread and accepted by Klal Yisrael that you can no longer nullify that. Regardless, it was basically eternalized in the Jewish calendar by the people's acceptance, and therefore those 2 were not nullified, but all the other minor ones that were not as well known and as well accepted, they basically follow the halakha of the 4 fasts that just like those turned back into days of Evel, and the Simcha was nullified, the Simcha of the other days also was nullified. Now, back to our Mishnah. Now we went back and forth. Now we could go back to our Mishnah, which said 6 dates on the calendar, right? We will send the shluchim to notify the people of the Golah, the people of the exile, everywhere else outside of the actual perimeters of Yerushalayim, even in Eretz Yisrael. It's not just the Golah, but even in Eretz Yisrael, all the other cities had to be notified from the Bedira Gadol in Yerushalayim what the date of the Rosh Chodesh was. 6 dates. So 2 of the 6 was Elul and Tishrei. Elul because of Rosh Hashanah, right? So the earliest one we send out because normally, as we discussed before, the reason it was for Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the first 2 days of the year, and the way you would know it is not sending shluchim on Rosh Hashanah, because the first day of the Chodesh, even if you have Edim, it's already too late, even in the city of Yerushalayim. Certainly it would be too late for sending shluchim out to other cities for Rosh Hashanah. You got to get there to Tveria 2 days later and say, 2 days ago was Rosh Hashanah, Chazak Baruch, finished already. You could make Havdalah now. Like, what's the difference? Right? So therefore, the way we do it is, we know that Elul usually is 30 days, and you send the shluchim this way. That when Rosh Chodesh Elul was seen and testified in the Bet Din, we send the shluchim out to tell them when Rosh Chodesh Elul was, This way, they would just do the formula based on 99% of the time that Elul was a set amount of days, and now automatically you know when Rosh Hashanah was, right? Because meaning the 30th day would be the Rosh Hashanah, right? Instead of being the 31st day, because Elul does not become usually Meubar. Okay? Fine. So the obvious question now is, if you're doing this already, which this we could relate to, right? It's very logical. Very logical that if you have this formula, the 30th day would be Rosh Hashanah. So all you need to do is send shluchim out to tell the people when Rosh Chodesh Elul was, and then automatically they will add 30 days, and that would be Rosh Hashanah. Right? Amazing. Now, what's the obvious question? Obvious question is, okay, if you're doing that already, why do you have to send shluchim on Tishrei? Just do an Elul and call it a day. Because now I know when Rosh Hashanah is going to be. Automatically, when I know what Rosh Hashanah is going to be, I also know when Yom Kippur is going to be, and when Sukkot is going to be. And therefore, you don't need to send anybody on Tishrei. And yet, the Mishnah said, we send shluchim out on Tishrei for takanat muadot, right? For the muadot, because Tishrei has, also Yom Kippur, also Chag HaSukkot, also Shmini Atzeret. So we need it for all those. But says the Gemara, why exactly is that? If I know when Rosh Hashanah is, I automatically know when all the other ones are. So don't send shluchim on Tishrei. That's the obvious question anybody would ask, and obviously the Gemara asks that as well. So let's read it together. Al Elul mipenei Rosh Hashanah. This is the 10th line from the top of the line. Top of the Amud. Says the Gemara, Al Elul mipenei Rosh Hashanah, Al Tishrei mipenei Takarat HaMuadot. Elul you would send because of Rosh Hashanah, and Tishrei you would send for Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret. Asks the Gemara, Kevan the nafki lehu Elul at Tishrei lama lehu. Once they're going out on Elul, Chob, I know now when Rosh Hashanah was, and it follows that I should know when Yom Kippurim is and when Sukkot is, and so on and so forth. So why are you sending again next month on Tishrei? And if you want to suggest an answer, Dilma Iberu al Elul, maybe because we mentioned that this is a formula that works the majority of the time. The vast majority of the time, Elul is not Meubar. So the 30th day is Rosh Hashanah, right? But maybe, just maybe, Elul would be Meubar, right? Right, and that would be the answer. So, well, this is a formula, but it's not airtight. It's not airtight. So, it's good enough, it's important enough for us to send the shluchim on Elul to tell people the 95% chance when Rosh Hashanah is going to be. And that's important enough, good enough for us. 95% is big enough of a thing to send the shluchim, but still, there's 5% chance that Elul would become Meubar, and in which case, they celebrated Rosh Hashanah one day too early. So celebrating Rosh Hashanah one day too early is not the end of the day, because anyways, Rosh Hashanah we do it 2 days even in Eretz Yisrael. So it ended up being that you did blow shofar on the actual Rosh Hashanah, but Yom Kippur you do it one day too early, right? Then you're in two problems. First of all, you didn't eat on Tishri, and most importantly, you didn't fast on Asiri, right? You get an invitation to a very warm place. It's not good, right? So we certainly don't want to risk that. So says the Gemara, maybe that's what you would say. Maybe that's what you would suggest, but it's impossible to suggest that. You know why? Because we know historically that has never happened. You're listening to this. From the time of Ezra Sofer, right? We talk about Tanakh, biblical times already. Well, the preface to this is that in the time, it's not just an arbitrary thing. In the time of Ezra Sofer, it actually happened that Elul was meuberet, right? Became meubar. Without getting into too much of the details for that, but says the Gemara, from that time of Ezra Sofer until now, the time of the Gemara that we're talking, there has never ever been a case, one time even, the Elul became Meubar. So that's not like 95%, that's like 105%. It's like, there's no chance. Which would throw us right back into the question of why are you sending people for Tishrei? If you're sending for Elul, you should be good to go, right? That's the question of the Gemara. Let's read it together. V'amar Rab Chanina bar Kana, we know in the name of Rab Chanina bar Kana, in the name of Rav, Mimot Ezra ve'elach, from the time of Ezra Sofer until now, Lamatzinu Elul Meubar. We never have had month of Elul be 30 days. Right? So you can imagine the 30th day is going to be Rosh Hashanah. It's going to be Echad B'Tishrei. Says the Gemara, Lo matzinu de lo istrich. Gemara says, the answer, Lo matzinu is because it was not needed. If it would be needed, then we would do it. Right? Ha istrich. It's not, the historic fact is not telling you that it's impossible to happen. It will happen if we needed to. What would be legitimate need? Now you may be surprised. Legitimate need, according to the Gemara, would be if it falls in a way that now you would have 3-day Yom Tov, right? If it would become next to Shabbat, now what happens? You can't have vegetable and fresh food for the second or third day, right? And therefore, that the kavod of the Yom Tov would be enough of a reason that they would want to adjust the calendar for people to be able to have a proper Yom Tov. Or imagine Yom Kippur and Shabbat fall back to back, right? And somebody, Rahman Hassan, dies, right? So now the body is just sitting there for 3 days. You don't want that to happen. These are considerations the Gemara says it will be considered important enough and that will be isterich for us to change, adjust it, and then obviously adjust this back to its original thing afterwards. But these would be considered enough reason to adjust it. So therefore, the fact that from the time of Ezra Sofer until now it hasn't happened doesn't mean for a second that it can't happen. It could happen if need be. Says the Gemara. But then the Gemara says, so if you do that, Rosh Hashanah. There's one big problem with that. Because if you sent last month, right, and the second day of Elul, you sent Shluchim to announce when Rosh Chodesh Elul was, now everyone is going to celebrate Rosh Hashanah when? Well, the 30th day is going to be Rosh Hashanah, right? But then at the end, you say, you know what? We're just going to be ma'abir the Elul because we want proper Yom Tov for people. So then all the other cities, they celebrate Rosh Hashanah 1 day early. Obviously, still, they're blowing shofar on the second day, whatever. But they're doing it wrong. Can't do that. You can't mess them over. You yourself, the Bedin, sent shluchim to announce Rosh Hashanah on Monday, and now you're telling people it's going to be Tuesday. Can't do that, right? So says the Gemara, listen to this. Mutav, you want to have a concept of how you have to respect Yamim Tovim, and how you have to celebrate. Mutav tikalkel Rosh Hashanah, better to let Rosh Hashanah be mekulkal, and there will be a day off. Velo tikalkel kulhu ma'adot, and it should not be disrespectful to all the rest of the ma'adot, that all of them would be messed over now by being 3-day Yom Tovs, and the dead bodies, corpses are sitting around, and the people can't have food for Yom Tov properly, and so on and so forth. The economy, the katani, it says, I'll also prove it to you, because the Mishnah's language is, on Elul you send because of Rosh Hashanah, and on Tishrei you send not because of Mu'adot, but because of Takanat Mu'adot. Right? That one extra word, Takanat Mu'adot, is coming to tell you that's not because of the Moed itself, but because we want it to be Metukan, we want it to be proper. And that is reason enough for us to send another set of Shluchim on Chodesh Tishrei to make sure that people know how to celebrate Yom Kippur Chag HaSukkot and Shmini Atzeret, because again, like for instance, next year, all of the Yamim Tovim fall to be on, if I'm not mistaken, I'm guessing based on how the calendars work, so someone could check it right now as in real time. I think next year, all of them are going to be 3-day Yom Tov, right? That's how it happens to be. In next year, like Sukkot, and follows with Shmini Atzeret, right? Rosh Hashanah, all those would be weekend dates, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, Kulhu Ma'adot. Kulhu Ma'adot will be ruined because you want to do one thing. It better let the Rosh Hashanah be a thing and then keep all the other Ma'adot properly going forward. So that's the Shema Mina of the Gemara. And now we're going to get into the next ones. We'll get a Geshmak piece on Kislev, which B'ezrat Hashem we will discuss in the next shiur. Chazak u'baruch.